Good afternoon, class. I thought I'd give a brief week two lecture video here. I know last week being the first week for some, if this was really, I don't know if your first week um, or first course with Coastal Pines. I mean, if it was, I hope everything went smoothly. I know there were some issues with some of the simple syllabus. Some students were able to get onto it. Some, had a little bit issues. That's why I sent out the announcement. I put an attachment there for the syllabus, and it also should have went to your Office 365 student email. It was kind of a crazy week for me. My oldest daughter had COVID, so my wife and I, with my youngest daughter also, we sort of had to play that musical parent. Um, juggling around who's going to stay home, this and that. So I apologize for last week. I meant to give a another video toward the end of the week, but it got to the point where I couldn't really do that with everything going on at home. So that's why I went ahead and jumped on here for an early week two video. I still have several discussion posts to look at from week one. I think for the most part, everybody did the syllabus quiz. There might have been one or two. I'm not sure what the deal was that. I do know that they did another purge, which basically means if you owed money, they basically dropped you from all your courses after 12 o'clock today. And you're probably not going to be able to get reinstated if they did that. The other thing is that I'm going to have to do is do some no-shows. So if you didn't complete, the first two assignments for week one, I'm going to have to mark you down as a no-show and you will be dropped from the course. Now, again, you can kind of go through and possibly try to get back in. That could be an issue where, you may have to, you're going to have to fill out some forms. Um, you may have to pay pay additional fees to get in. I'm not sure. But I mean, I try to work with everybody. I mean, basically, this is, the seventh day. It's been a whole week. You should have been able to log in, right? Should have been able to go to your Blackboard page. Should have been able to email, do the first two assignments, whatever the case may be. This week, we're going to sort of talk about the Raymond Carver story, Cathedral, and we were going to look at Joyce Carol Oates' a particular short story. Remember, due by this Sunday, 11:59. You do have another discussion post. These little weekly assignments should be starting to help you as it gets closer to week five, when we're going to have the first exam in the course, which is going to be the fiction exam. A lot of the questions and stuff that you see week one, week two, week three, it's going to help you prepare for that test, because some of the exam questions are going to be similar. In the coming weeks, we will talk about the other half sort of to that exam, which is the fiction essay. That's going to be due, I believe, like a week or so before you have to take the exam. So we have a couple weeks before that happens, but I just wanted to sort of throw that out. Each one of these particular genres, right? Start with short stories, we go to poetry, then we do the drama. Each one of those are 5 weeks in length. So you can kind of expect week four, week five, you're going to have some sort of an essay and some sort of an exam at the end of each one of these units. So for the poetry unit, it's kind of split up because you do have a midterm exam that's going to be a respondus deal. That usually happens about the middle of October. So you're going to have, um, that first two, probably week 8, you're going to have a midterm poetry exam that you're going to have 60 minutes to be able to complete. And then the last sort of like the week 5 version of that, which would be about week, 9 or 10. When we look at the calendar, it's going to be when your poetry essay is going to be due. And then we get into drama, and you have the research paper, and then of course the final exam as it gets closer to, the first week or two of December. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about, and I'm going to show you my screen. Probably go through real quick to kind of show you some stuff. A little bit deeper in the Blackboard, maybe. So you're not 100%, not really. Let me see here. All right. Should be able to see my screen. This is going to be basically where you're going to find your information. Again, I got about 9, I guess, from the um, discussion post. I go through and try to grade those. I try to go through early on. If it's earlier in the week, I try to read, and I show you what I've been doing with that. Hopefully, you should be able to go in and see my comments, maybe my questions, my suggestions. I try to put that stuff on early on. I think the big thing that folks, and this is really stuff that you should have learned in 1101 because you needed to pass 1101 to be able to get to 1102, is when you're doing these, because you are using or need to be using quotations from the actual stories, you need to be using MLA 9 parenthetical or in-text citation format, and you do need to include sort of a works cited section. When it comes to the actual essay, it's going to be a page, but since we're doing a lot of this stuff online here, it's going to be like here, you want to have a works cited section. And if you should have been talking about both particular stories, you're probably going to have a little bit more to the works cited page like this. I mean, it looks correct. This one does. This one is not correct. So, you should have learned this stuff in 1101, whoever you had for 1101, because you should have had a research paper that you had to use MLA 9 and do a works cited page and all that stuff. So that's why you're going to be losing points if you, fail to do some of this stuff. So make sure that you include this particular, that stuff in your paper or the stuff online, so you're not, losing points that are really easy to make. The other thing I was going to show you, let's see, this is where the simple syllabus is. This is where your OER textbook is, your MLA 9 handbook. A lot of this stuff I talked about last week. You definitely want to look at these two things if you're having trouble with Ultra. Look at some of the videos. You want to look at the lockdown browser and monitor information. Watch those videos. Read that information as it gets closer to October, because that's when we're going to have that midterm exam. Is going to be using that Respondus. Again, you have tutor.com. I would probably use tutor.com when it comes to looking at drafts of essays. The librarian chat's going to be helpful when we get closer to the research paper, I guess. And then if you look here, assignment deadlines, I put subject to change because that could be a possibility. But this is going to tell you what is due and when it's due. So we probably have nearly 14 to 16 different assignments, basically one a week for the most part, unless we have an extended holiday or something of that nature. So you do have time, right? If you don't like the grade that you made on your first discussion post, or the first syllabus quiz, you got 14 weeks still to improve that grade. I will say I will drop one of your lowest low stake assignment grades, sort of like a quiz or discussion post, as it gets closer to the month of November. And if time allows, I do try to offer a little bit of extra credit after midterm. What I can't drop is a major essay or a major exam. Those have to sort of stick. But I might be able, like I said, drop one of your low stake assignments, at least one, and then offer maybe 1 or 2 extra credit opportunities as we move along. And I will let you know when that's going to happen. You get an announcement, you get an email. Obviously, I would take advantage of it. no matter where your grade is at, it's always good to have extra cushion. Just because you never know what's going to happen in your life after midterm. And, doing that extra credit could be a difference of making an A and a B, or a C and a D, or a C and a B. So you probably want to kind of take advantage of that. And again, I'll let you know when it's time. Um, and it's going to be optional. So if you don't want to do it, I'm not going to, twist your hand and tell you got to do it. But if you want to guarantee sort of a decent grade heading into the final exam, I would probably do some of the extra credit at least. This is modular one again. You can go through that. This is where the first video was, sort of the overview. And there's the quiz. There's the first, like I said, the discussion post. Generally, what's going to happen is as we go from one week to the other, I'm going to open these modulars up. So as it gets closer to week 3, modular 3 is going to open. So as we get closer to the last week of our unit here, at some point, all 5 modulars are going to be open for a while. But as we get closer to that test, that exam, I'm going to start closing off modular 1, modular 2, modular 3, modular 4. So if you need any of that information, you might want to either download it, save it, copy and paste it, print it out, whatever the case may be. Just because I have to close down the first 4 of these modulars to start opening up modulars 5, 6, 7, and 8, and that type of deal. So right now we're in modular 2, which is week 2. And there's a couple things there. Like I said, here's where this assignment is. That's the question. And this right here is probably going to be helpful. Again, it should have been stuff that you should have known from any previous literature class. And especially 1101, this basically shows you how to cite fiction, short fiction, novels, that type deal. So you want to kind of look at this, study this, because when you get to the fiction essay, you're going to have to quote stuff. When you're doing these discussion questions, you're going to have to quote stuff. And this is going to show you how to do that properly. So you're not losing, additional points going from week 1 to week 2 to week 3. And you know how to sort of cite fiction when it comes to citing fiction. This is where obviously the discussion post is going to be. I give you some instructions here to sort of follow. And really you need to engage again with one other classmate, at least 100 words. Your post needs at least to be 250 words. So, I mean, if you look at it, if you do 250 words, sort of double spaced or whatever, it's about a page. The 100 words deal to your one of your classmates, that's probably about half a page. And this is sort of what I'm going to be, grading you on. So really the first sort of 50% of your grade is you posting your work. And then make sure, of course, the grammar is okay. You got the works cited section, you're quoting properly. You have at least 250 words. You're posting before the Sunday deadline. And then you actually go back and you engage with a peer. That would be where the other 50% comes in. So if you're losing points on this, chances are, one, if you don't do anything, you're going to get a 0 on it. If you just post your stuff, granted everything is correct and there's nothing wrong with it, then you can get up to a 50% on it. And if you post your stuff and it's decent and you comment at least 100 words on another peer's post, then you can get up to a 100 on it. A lot of these, I think with the first one, most folks, the grades are kind of all over the place. Some were 100, some were in the 90s, 80s, 70s, 60s, 40s, 0. So they're going to, vary as we move along this semester. But really, these should be, easier grades to get, because you're basically just reading whatever that work is, responding to the question, and then engaging with the classmate. All right. So if you go here to the readings, You're going to find some additional stuff. There's some videos there you can kind of listen to and watch. Again, as it relates to the readings, really what I want you to focus on are really the readings of the week, which you can find here, Carver's Cathedral, and you can find Oates's Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? I gave you some video analysis and some summaries of the stories here. You click on that. There's a couple, when it comes to literary analysis as it relates to setting and style, you can watch some videos here that relate to the stuff that's in this hyperlink and also on the page numbers in your e-text. So again, probably what I would recommend if you want to kind of cut down on the reading a little bit is watch your videos. If you still are, unsure about what's going on or have, trouble understanding, what setting, what style is, then I would click on the hyperlink because now you go from the video to more of a visual thing. And if you're still having some issues, then I'd go back to the textbook and read these pages. And if you're still having problems, at that point, I'd probably would, email me so we can set up a tutoring meeting, whether it's virtual via Teams. And I give you my tutoring hours and my office hours here before we leave today, or we can do something office hours or in-person tutoring, something of that nature. So really you got 3 or 4 different ways to get some of the textbook reading material, and some of it's going to be, again, if you had 10th, 11th, 12th grade English at some point, especially if you're currently doing enrollment, some of this stuff is really going to be like, we just learned this like last April. Or whatever the case may be. Now, for some of y'all that's been out of school 10, 15 years, you've probably heard of it. It's just dusting off the old cobweb in the back of the brain. And again, YouTube is really nice. You can, if you need additional videos, if the videos I have here are just not cutting the mustard for you, then look up what a literary analysis setting is or style. You can use other videos, whatever it's going to work to make you succeed. Is all fair game. So when we look at this particular, and I'm going to sort of go back now. Let's see. We're going to start with Raymond Carver's Cathedral, and then we're going to sort of go through, certain areas there, and then get back to the Oates piece. So with the Cathedral, I want to give you brief context, summarize the plot, then move through characters, themes, symbolism, narrative techniques, interpretive angles, and some classroom questions that we can kind of ask each other, or something that you can kind of think about as we, look at that discussion question. These particular questions can maybe build into something bigger as we get closer to week 3 and 4, and we're talking about the fiction essay. You might need a particular topic to think about. You can see what, maybe these little question deals that I bring up may be of help when it comes to that. So some biography information, historical context on this actual story. It was published in 1981. It was included in the 1983 collection, Cathedral. And this story marks Carver's mature, minimalistic style. It also appears during a moment in the late 20th century American fiction concerned with everyday lives. As you can tell when you read the story and watch some of the summaries and the videos that I've provided, it deals with alcoholism and a working class struggles. The story is often read as a turn toward empathy and human connection in Carver's work. So, a little bit about plot summary, right? The narrator is an unnamed man, is uncomfortable when his wife's old friend Robert, a blind man, arrives to visit. The narrator is cynical, insecure, as we can tell, and struggles with jealousy about the deep bond his wife shares with Robert. Over the visit, they drink, talk, watch television. In the climax, the narrator attempts awkwardly to describe a cathedral to Robert. Robert asks the narrator to draw one with his hands, or with his hand on Robert's hand. Through his embodied exercise, the narrator experiences a sudden widening of perception and connection. ending with him seeing something beyond his previous limited vision. So he sort of has, you might have heard of this word epiphany, maybe in some James Joyce poetry or James Joyce short stories. Carver has a really, likes to use that epiphany. He also likes to use what they call zero endings, where it's up to the reader to interpret how his particular short fiction ended, or where do the characters go after you finish reading the ending. Sometimes Joyce has that same deal with some of his short stories as well. So when we look at some of the major characters in this particular story, we obviously have this narrator, always, you can kind of say the protagonist, the difference between a protagonist and antagonist. A lot of folks think the protagonist is always the good guy and the antagonist is always the bad guy. Sometimes that's not always the case. Protagonist could be the main person of the particular story. So sort of keep that in mind. But this guy is middle age, he's working class, he's blunt, he's insecure, particularly about intimacy and emotional expression. He is also shaped by routines and prejudice. We're thinking, probably late 70s, early 80s here. His wife is, more or less practical, warm, emotionally expansive. Past relationship with Robert provides emotional texture. Robert, of course, is the blind man. He's warm, perceptive, generous. He models a different way of seeing and relating, even though he is, blind, but he's not deaf, so he can still hear. Uh, when we look also at key concepts or key themes, perception and insight is there. What it means to see versus to merely look. Communication and connection, right, between all three of the or among all three of these characters. How genuine the genuine contact can transform isolation. We see empathy and transformation, the narrative's slow movement from suspicion to an awkward compassion, especially from the beginning when he first is introduced to Robert to the end when they're both sort of, late night, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. Uh, one is trying to help the other draw a cathedral. One is blind, one can see, that type deal. Limits of language. The story shows the failure of words alone and the power of nonverbal tactile experience, especially when the hand of a person that can see is controlling the hand of a person who can't, and vice versa. Masculinity and vulnerability, of course. You have the narrator's crisis of identity softens through the encounter. And now we get into the symbolism, important motifs, the cathedral itself, right? I'm gonna see if I can pull some of this stuff up as well. Hopefully this stuff works. Yeah. So again, as you can tell, about 8 pages. It's really kind of short. It's not that long. And this one actually has some stuff. Let me see, where is this? Okay, yeah. So some of the symbolism and important motifs, the cathedral itself, a symbol of shared meaning, human striving, and communal vision. An object the narrator cannot imagine until he draws it, right? Blindness and sight, literal blindness contrast with different forms of insight. The narrator is blind to emotional death until the very end. Television, passive, social, surface level scene, the drawing exercise counters this passivity. The hand drawing exercise, tactile embodied knowledge replacing abstract description. Of course, when we think about the narrative technique and tone, it's first person, right? You see a lot of I's and we's and my's and that type stuff in here. It's conversational, plain spoken. Carver believed in, being minimalistic with his language and his diction, words, creates intimacy and unreliability, right? We get the narrator's opinion and blind spots. Carver's pared down prose and dialogue build realism. Small details and repetition reveal the narrative's defensive psychology. The tone shifts from defensive sarcasm to quiet openness by the end of it. So if we look at some close reading touch points, opening domestic details, note how everyday task establishes character and setting. That's one thing that you can kind of zero in when you look at the story at the very first. The narrator's monologues examines rhetoric, his dismissive language about Robert and the wife's past. Television scene contrasts meditated images with embodied drawing, and then of course we have the final drawing scene at the very end. Analyze, sentence rhythm, sensory detail, and the narrative's bodily description as he traces the cathedral. This is the moment of epiphany, as we talked about. A couple interpretive approaches that you can kind of take with this if you're thinking about writing about this particular story. As it relates to not only the discussion question this week, but when you start thinking about weeks 3 and weeks 4 with that particular fiction essay coming up. You can look at it from a psychological reading. The story has a personal transformation, overcoming, isolation through embodied empathy. You can also have a formal and linguistic reading of this particular story. You can look at Carver's minimalism, how sparse language produces emotional depth. You can also, approach it from a social cultural reading. You can pay attention to working class life, masculinity, and redemptive possibilities in ordinary encounters. There's also that religious and ritual reading. The cathedral as a circular sacrament, communal creation, and symbolic site for revelation. Some questions to kind of ponder, as you are reading this, maybe for the first time or fixing to read it, or maybe rereading it to help you not only study for the fiction exam or, think about something to write for the fiction paper, the discussion question for this week. What does seeing mean in the actual story? How does Robert see differently from the narrator, right? A lot of contrast there, a lot of tension, conflict, it seems. Is the narrator's change genuine or temporary, you think? How does Carver use everyday detail to create emotional revelation? That's pretty much Carver's fiction here. In a nutshell, it's a really good short read. It does have a lot of realism to it. I think that's why a lot of folks like Carver from the 70s and 80s. He has since passed. He died of cancer not too, I think it's been a while, but yeah, he died of cancer. I think he had lung cancer or something. He quit smoking, of course, but it still caught up to him. But yeah, that's Raymond Carver's short story. And before we get into the next story, I want to talk a little bit about my tutoring hours and my office hours. Now, the office hours, as you can tell, basically are Monday and Wednesday and Tuesday and Thursday. The R, if you're not, not familiar with college lingo, when you see R on a schedule, it means Thursday. The T obviously means Tuesday. The M, the W, the F, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Chances are that you won't see an S, but if you do, it could be Saturday, and usually if it means Sunday, it'd be SUN. So office hours Monday and Wednesday, 8 in the morning to 9, and then 5 to 6 in the afternoon. Tuesday, Thursday, it's 11 a.m. to noon, and then 5 to 6. And I plan to update the syllabus with these hours on that particular section as we move along. But I just want to give you these now in case, if you are in the Camden area and you want to meet up, for an office hour or do some in-person tutoring, it's probably best that you sort of email me within a 24-hour period so we can either, agree to meet up. My office is kind of small, so it'd probably be better to meet up either in my classroom or the library downstairs. But, if I know that you're coming, I can, set some time aside and we can, bring your work or bring your questions or whatever you need help with, and we can um, approach it, tackle it, hopefully resolve any kind of issues that you may have. So in-person tutoring at the Camden campus, as you can tell, Mondays is 9 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock in the morning, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays are both 9:15 to 10:15 in the morning. And then we got some virtual tutoring. Basically, we can set up a Teams meeting like we're doing right here when I'm giving you these lectures. We can, set up something one-on-one. If you have want to try to meet as a group, we can try to do that. Usually Wednesday 9 to 10 is a really good time, and then Tuesday and Thursday again 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If these times don't work, you can always email me and we can kind of work together to schedule something that will work in our schedule. I'm basically here Monday through Thursday, 7:30 in the morning until 6 o'clock in the evening, and of course I have Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off. So. And with that said, keep in mind we do have a holiday. It doesn't really, I mean, holidays don't impact our online courses that much because you're not having to travel anywhere to be there. So, I mean, even though this coming Monday is Labor Day, you're not really, I mean, you could have it off from work, or if you're a dual enrollment student, you could have it off from school that way. But since you're not actually traveling, to be in a physical class, it doesn't really impact us that much. So, with that being said, now you can take Monday off next if you don't want to do anything, and that's fine. That's your prerogative, as long as you get the stuff that needs to be due on the 31st, and then you get the stuff that needs to be due on September 7th. I really don't care if you do take Monday off. Now, if you're one of those that because you have a lot going on, you may have multiple classes, you may have to travel for various things, work or school, get kids, whatever the case may be. You may want to work on Monday. You may want to labor on Labor Day. But then because you did work on Monday, you might want to take Thursday off. So you can, sort of move the goalpost or move the holiday. Instead of taking off for Monday, you're going to put, your Labor Day is going to be quote unquote Thursday or Friday or whatever the case may be. But just kind of keep in mind the holidays don't impact us as much as they would if you were, an in-person situation. All right, so we're going to look at the next bit, or the next story, which deals with Joyce Carol Oates. And some of y'all might have read some of her other short stories or maybe some novels of hers. I think she might have did a little bit of poetry. Let's see, pull her stuff up here. Hers is about 11 pages. Of course, if you look, the font's kind of smaller and it's not necessarily double spaced, but you do get a lot of dialogue. It's good that if you go through and watch some of these videos, or at least, look up some stuff on her Wikipedia about the story, get some background, which I'm going to tell you a little bit here in momentarily. So, again, just like with the Carver piece, we're going to go through some biographical information, some historical context, and then we're going to, go through and look at, plot summary a little bit, move through characters, themes, symbolism, uh, narrative techniques, different angles to approach, and then also some questions to kind of ponder while you try to answer, that question for the discussion for this week. And then also, maybe something that you can kind of use to go, for or against when you reply to your peer. So we will look at some of that stuff and approach it that way. So the story in this case was first published in 1966, and then later Oates included it in a 1968 collection. So if you look at it, um, a lot of these stories are still considered in the modern time period. Uh, we just had been born when it was first published. So yeah, I mean, if you look, I mean, now is 2025, 21st century. This story was published nearly 60 years ago. So it's set up against the backdrop of the 1960s America, rising youth culture, changing sexual norms, suburban domestic natures were going on. You also have Oates acknowledging a real life criminal case as a partial inspiration. So again, that's why you might want to go back and kind of look at some of this, some of her history and background of the story, because it is about a real life criminal case. Keep in mind the era's anxieties about teenager independence and male entitlement when you read this particular piece of fiction. So a little bit about the plot is Connie is a 15 to 16-year-old girl who divides her life between the private mirror of her imagination and the public performance of attractiveness. After a family picnic, she spends time at a diner and later is at home alone when a man calling himself Arnold Friend appears at her house. He flatters, controls, and moves quickly from seduction to veiled threats. His companion, Ali Oscar, waits in the car. The confrontation escalates at the doorway. Connie, being frightened and confused, ultimately walks out with Arnold. The ending is abrupt and ambiguous. Again, sort of gives you that zero ending like we saw with the cathedral with Carver, implying a loss of innocence and likely harm. So again, that's sort of open to interpretation. What happens to this teenager Connie at the end of this story? Is she in danger? Is she in harm? Does she get raped? Does she get abused in some way? Kidnapped? We just really don't know. It's kind of open up to our interpretation at that point. Some major characters to kind of think about again, the protagonist, antagonist in this case. We have Connie, youthful, image focused, caught between girlhood and adulthood, right? She's at that age between 15 and 16. She's not quite 18 to 21 yet, but at the same time, she's not a preteen. She's not between 10 and 13. She's going through that awkward stage. As most of us all, if you live long enough, you're going to go through that preteen, teen, and then young adult. And it gets pretty awkward, especially from middle school to high school. And then from high school to young adult, real world, college, that type deal. Her preoccupation with appearance structures much of the opening. So again, think about, even though this is the 1960s, her mirror is sort of like her phone in this case. We didn't have, TikTok, didn't have YouTube or Facebook or Instagram or a lot of these places where you can just sit there and snap pictures on your phone and upload them, create videos. She's more, let's look at the mirror. Let's look and see how my hair is, my makeup, the cheek structures, my hips, whatever the case may be. Doing typical teenage stuff, right? But instead of posting it, she's constantly looking at the mirror. She's both vain and vulnerable. So that's something else that you can kind of keep in mind, right? Arnold Friend, the antagonist in this case, he's charming, but he's predatory. And Oates layers his description with odd details that creates an uncanny possibility, the possibility of a supernatural effect here. Is he really a person, or it's just sort of part of her imagination, maybe, that of being Connie's? That's something else you can kind of think about. Ellie Oscar is a silent accomplice, mostly present in the car. Connie's mother and sister June are foals. If you look at some of the key terms in your textbook, you're going to learn what a foal is. They're basically contrast characters of each other. June represents conventional adulthood. The mother is moralizing and often absent emotionally. So, sometimes you can kind of think of people in your own life at this point. You may have a particular older woman figure in your life that's more conventional of adulthood over a mother. You may also, sometimes when you think of your own mother, depending on how old you are, she can be very, controlling, like Connie's mother here is, moralizing, but often, because of whatever reason, jobs or other things, could be emotionally absent when the daughter really needs her the most, or the son, if you're, teenage boy or whatever the case may be. Key themes. We get this key theme of loss of innocence and a dark coming of age. You have this predatory or predation, abuse of power, how an adult manipulates a teenage girl. We have this identity and performance. Connie's sense of self is constructed through appearance and other people's attention, right? Reality versus fantasy. Romanticized ideals Connie holds collide with a brutal conceived reality, right? Especially as the story moves on and this guy starts the sort of stalker come to her house, right? Yeah, the male gaze. The story exposes how women's bodies and sexuality are surveyed and controlled. Um, that's something else, during the 60s, 70s, sometimes even still today. Symbolism and important motifs. Arnold's physical artifice, right? Sunglasses, painted on features, his name, friend, used ironically. Signals, right? Deception and menace. The car's liminal, dangerous space, instrument of entrapment, right? Once Connie gets in that car, you got this big, towering, grown adult guy. Um, she's limited of what she could do because I mean, at that point, he has her. Right? He's sort of like the spider and the fly. We don't have to tell you who the fly is. Mirrors and appearance emphasize Connie's performative identity. Music and popular culture elements frame her fantasy. So, I mean, again, think about the 1960s, some of the music, some of the stuff going on in popular culture during that time. Um, we were getting out of one war, being World War II, and getting more into, we had the Korean War and the Vietnam coming. So we had some of that going on. The drug culture, thinking about Woodstock, that type deal was starting to go, hippies, that type deal. The house, usually a safe domestic space, becomes a site of violation when the predator intrudes. Some narrative technique and tone. This case, instead of, like with Carver using first person, Oates uses third person limited focalization centered on Connie, often using free indirect discourse to echo her thoughts and voice. The prose moves between lyrical and sensory detail and stark, menacing clarity. So her particular story is going to be a little bit more poetic in a lot of ways, lyrical, has a lot of sensory detail, where Carver's is really to the point, sort of hits you in the gut. He doesn't use a lot of flowery words. He's not necessarily as lyrical or poetic in his prose as Oates is. Um, the dialogue in this particular story shifts registers between teenage banter and the manipulative cadences of Arnold, producing an increasing tension as the scene progresses. So you still have sort of that, I wouldn't say baby talk, but you still have sort of that 1960 cultural teen talk, sort of like the Valley Girl in the 80s, sort of like, you hear the different talk that's going on with teenagers now, seventh and eighth grade. It's usually around a lot of nonsense words that they learn from Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or X or whatever the case may be. Um, if we look at some close reading touching points, pay attention to the opening mirror scene where the language established Connie's split self, right? There is a split in personality. Again, she's sort of splitting from being that teenager, that child, into a young adult, but she's not quite there yet. You might want to analyze and look at, really examine and reread Arnold's speech, how he alternates flattery and command, and how Oates controls pacing through short sentences and repetition here. The doorway scene is structurally crucial. The threshold is symbolic of transition and choice. And again, when we look at the final paragraphs, compress action and emotion, look at the syntax, how the words, how the sentences are sort of combined together. Repetition again, and the image of Connie leaving, they all complicate questions of agency at this point. A couple ways that you can approach, if you're thinking about essay topics with this particular story, you can approach it from a feminist reading. The story critiques patriarchal control and sexual violence and shows the societal vulnerabilities of young women. You also have that psychoanalytical reading. Arnold can be read as a projection, internalization of Connie's emerging merging sexual anxieties or id impulses. So think about id, ego, superego when it comes back to anybody that's taking any kind of psychology classes, Sigmund Freud. And then you also have this religious, demonic um, allegory. Many critics read Arnold as a devil figure. Textual oddities support this particular allegorical layer. You also have realistic crime reading. It's also portrayal of a, you know, predation grounded in social condition, absence or intensive adults, cultural objectification, easy word to say, huh? And predatorial tactics. Some questions that you can kind of ask yourself while you're reading and thinking about answering that particular post before Sunday is Arnold purely human, supernatural, or both? What textual evidence, basically quotes, support your view? To what extent is Connie responsible for her own fate? Is her leaving an act of agency or coercion? How does Oates portray the adult world? Complicit, indifferent, simply absent? So that's just something you can kind of look at. And just like with the, Carver piece, this is really the Oates fiction in a nutshell as well. So I hope you got a good bit, hopefully, when you start reading, because, if you're watching this before you actually start reading, then a lot of this stuff might be kind of confusing. But so I would probably try to go, if possible, read some of the stuff before coming back and watching the video. It makes some sense. Or, I mean, again, you can watch this and then go back and read. But just make sure that you pace yourself. Don't think that you have to get everything done in 1 day or 2 days. You do have 7 days to get this stuff done. I try to keep the reading not necessarily as, lengthy as a novel, but also not, the first week's reading shouldn't have been that bad. The sticks piece really wasn't even that, that long. It wasn't a page. Um, Story of an hour was probably a couple pages. So the reading level or the reading length may vary from one week to the next. But at the same time, I want to give you enough time so you can actually think about those questions that you got to answer, as it relates to the discussion assignment. Think about how you're going to answer it, how you're going to, who you're going to pick as it relates to a particular peer to reply to, how you're going to reply to them, and give you enough, opportunity to go back and kind of reread or read some of these stories, some of the stuff that's in your textbook, or watch some of the videos that I've provided. Um, because ultimately, if you look at it, because I'm opening, one week to the next, you're going to have all this stuff open. You really have from weeks 1 to week 5 to get all of this reading and video watching done. I mean, the only problem is you can't wait. If you did it that way, you'd have to read some stuff because otherwise you wouldn't know how to do the discussion questions accurately, or you wouldn't be able to do the quizzes because you're going to have some quizzes coming up. But as it relates to some of the reading in the textbook, you can pace yourself on that. You don't necessarily have to read everything or watch everything in 2 days. But just kind of keep in mind the window for these modulars to stay open is going to be short because as we get closer to week, 5, I'm going to have to start closing some of these modulars up. So that's why I say as it gets closer to when we start thinking about that fiction paper, which is probably going to be either week 3 or week 4, probably week 3, you want to go ahead and kind of have something narrowed down, nailed down maybe, and print out the stuff that you're going to need in case that modular closes up and that was the one that you're going to write your story or write your essay on, right? So you don't want to be put up in that situation. All right, so it's almost an hour. I want to try to keep some of these lecture videos about an hour, give and take, so you don't have too much more else to listen to or to get through. But just let me know if there's anything I can do to help. As we do get closer to the big fiction paper, to the poetry essay, if you want to send me drafts of that, you can email me drafts as a Microsoft Word attachment. You need to email it to me. The same thing is if you want me to look at some of the stuff that you're doing with these discussion questions, if you want to email me um, a Word copy of what you're planning on posting, I will give you some hints. I'll give you some pointers so that you can go ahead and have that sort of corrected or ironed out before you make that post. So you definitely would be sort of guaranteed that at least that 50% on that post, and you just have to go back and pick somebody that you haven't. I would say when it comes to picking a peer, don't pick one that maybe you did last week. Pick somebody different. Try to pick, somebody that hasn't, have a thread going on, because it seems like a lot of times students, they see the first one and they say, well, I'm just going to write a reply back to this person. And before you know it, there's, 24, 25 people in the class, but, Sarah here's got nearly 17 replies and everybody else only has 1 or 2. The other thing is you want to kind of keep in mind, the later that you wait, it's going to screw both you and a partner in your grade. Because if you wait until 10:35 on Sunday the 31st when this thing is due to post your first initial post, well, you still have to go back. Now the time is ticking because you got less than 2 hours because it's going to close at 11:59. So besides posting yours, you're going to have to go find a peer to write, 100 words or less. And if, somebody else out there is trying to find another peer to write on as well, they have to come to you. Well, I mean, if you wait until 2 hours or an hour before it's due, it kind of throws them up in a little bit of a limbo too. So that's why I'd say I would try to nail these done or get these done at least by Thursday or Friday if possible. That way you can have Saturday and all day Sunday to really go back and either tweak up what you need to tweak up, because you can delete your post and edit and re-upload it, that type deal. But at least give you enough time. Like if you post one by, let's say, if I was doing these things, if I got the assignment, Monday morning, I would try to have something posted of mine by Wednesday night. Then I would go back and look and see, which peer I want to respond to, and have that on there at least by, Saturday. Because then that would give you enough time to sort of digest a little bit of everything that you had to digest as it relates to the discussion. You can go back and kind of answer anything, because I try to leave, when I respond, I try to leave y'all a question that anybody basically can answer if they read it. But I try to leave individual questions that you can kind of think about that kind of guide you as we, move from week 1 to 2 to 3 to think a little bit deeper in these things. So that would give you at least Sunday to go back and kind of reflect, to make sure that you do have one in and that you did respond to another. Now you can respond to others if you want, but with this one, the only thing you need to do, like I said, is upload yours initially and then respond to somebody else before Sunday. That's it. You make sure everything is, works cited section, you're quoting correctly, your grammar's correct. You have, 250 words of your post, you have 100 words of your reply. You're following MLA standards as much as you can. Now, again, you can type this stuff up on Microsoft Word, which may be beneficial because you have the spell and grammar check there. If you got Grammarly, you could use that, and you can upload your particular response. If that will be helpful, and give you, a chance to practice a little bit more with the typing if you're one of those that just don't like to type. But it also gives you sort of like that second pair of eyes because you get the grammar and the spell check. So you really, 21st century seems like everything has spell check on it. So you really shouldn't be getting counted off for misspelled words at this point. Phone's got it, email's got it, Blackboard's got it, Grammarly's got it, Microsoft Word's got it. Just run your stuff through spell check, run it through a grammar check. Knock out that surface area stuff now, because a lot of this grammar stuff you should already know how to correct from not only 1101, but again, if you had went through K through 12, whether it's public or private school, you should know how to correct a sentence if it's messed up. All right, so I'm gonna leave it at there. Have a good week. Next week we will probably, the video maybe a little bit later in the middle of the week, just because Monday is a holiday and I won't be here on campus. So expect another video maybe Tuesday or Wednesday or next week. And I hope everybody has a great rest of your week too. Thanks.